And he heard the voice of the Lord speak to his heart. You're going to be the next pastor of this church. Well, he didn't tell anybody. I mean, he told me, but, he didn't tell anybody because we were young, early 20s. And so Brother Copeland then stopped what he was saying. He said, the day will come when this church will burst out of its walls and it will touch the ends of the earth. It'll go to all the world. And then he went back and he went to preaching. And he felt like that was a confirmation word to him. Well, we traveled. We got back from traveling in the ministry and after a season and felt to move back to Tulsa. We had been living in Arkansas during that traveling ministry time. We got back to Tulsa, and when we came back, the church where we'd been youth pastors, the pastor said, we'd like for you to do all the preaching. I want to retire, and I'd like you to just start doing all the preaching. So Billy Joe began to preach for him, and then they voted for us to be the pastors of that church. So we became the pastors of that church within about 3 months. And so January of 79, we became pastors, and the church went from 300 to 2,000 in a year and a half. And the neighbors weren't real happy. We were going to expand on the property, and we ended up having to go to court. We found out we needed to go to court because all the neighbors showed up at court and said, we don't want them because they hold us captive every Sunday with 6 services all day on Sunday. We cannot get out of our driveways. So, we love people. We weren't trying to, keep people in captivity. But anyway, we knew we had to relocate. Our board knew that we had to relocate. And they had birthed other churches before. And in the city, they had birthed actually Grace Church and Eastland Assembly of God Church had been birthed out of that church. So they said, I just feel like that y'all should birth a church. So we went down to 4400 South Sheridan and we birthed Victory Christian Center Easter Sunday of 1981. Now, we started with that very offering. We didn't have any money. It was a step of faith. We didn't know who would show up. And 1,600 people showed up. Praise you, Jesus. And so, anyway, during that time, it was a kind of a difficult time because that was when because all churches in those days went to banks to borrow money in order to do anything. So we went to a bank to borrow, to get into a loan, which we did in order to get that property. Well, it was during a time when the interest rates were between 14 and 15% floating. And so we were just surviving, just peddling water every month, trying to, meet the bills to pay. And we realized that we needed to get out of that situation. In fact, we heard some prophetic words, 3 different ministries that we heard that spoke. Get out of debt, stay out of debt, because the day is coming when it'll be very critical for churches to be out of debt if they're going to not only survive, but to reach this world, that they not be in debt. So we took that and we said, we are not ever going back into debt. So we knew that we had 3 things we had to do. God spoke to Bill Joe the story of David and Goliath. And he talked to him and said, David had to first kill a lion, then he had to kill a bear, and then he had to kill the giant. Many people want to kill the giant without first killing the lion and the bear. And so our lion was that we needed to sell the property. And then the bear was going to be find an interim place. And then the giant would be that we would buy land and then build to relocate the ministry. So, no one wanted that location because it had been remodeled. It was a car lot that had taken all the bays out and, no car people wanted it. No church wanted it because it didn't look like a church. And so we prayed. It was on the market for a season. And then the Lord said to Bill Joe, you gotta get that interim place now because this place is fixing to sell within the next 2 to 3 months. So anyway, we had to believe God for an interim place. It was Thoreau Junior High that we ended up meeting at during that time. And then God opened up the Maybe Center for us to have our Sunday services during that time, through those years. But we ended up getting a call from Walmart. And Walmart wanted to buy it to put their first Sam's in this city there, or the first super Walmart in this city. And so they did, and it later became a Sam's. And so then we ended up believing God. We had $700,000 out of that sale of that property. And we asked our board, look around the city, where's a good place for us to be? And so, anyways, we looked around the city. Billy Joe had a vision in his heart again. And he saw us meeting in a building across the street from ORU. He saw the buildings. Well, this was a pecan orchard. And the property belonged to ORU. And when he approached Brother Roberts said, hey, God doesn't make land anymore. And he said, we're not interested in selling. So he told our board, just drive around the city, see where you can find some land, that are possible places. They'd drive around the city, and all of them came back because none of them knew what he had seen in the vision. And they'd all come back and say, we just feel like we're supposed to be right next to ORU, but, is that property available? So we prayed. Well, God opened Brother Roberts' heart, and he said, I feel like we have a fraternal relationship, and just feel like that, yes, we're willing to sell the property, but we'll sell it to you for $5 million. Well, at that time, that was like saying that we could vote if we could write in Chinese, which, all my Chinese brothers and sisters here today, you know how that would feel if somebody asked you to write in, Farsi language. So it was like, okay, $5 million. And he said, and you can't borrow from a bank. You have to pay cash. So, that was the impossible part. That's why it was so impossible sounding. But you know what? When you have a vision, and your vision is not a selfish vision, but it's a vision because it's for people. And let me tell you something. Sometimes people say, well, I don't think churches spend money on land and buildings. Well, I'll tell you what. I've not seen very many people show up just to be out under a tent in July. Or in the rainy season. Or in the cold winter. So, you have to have them. You have to have land. You have to have buildings. And so anyway, we released our faith for that miracle. And my husband got the wisdom of God and went back to Brother Roberts and said, Brother Roberts, could we buy the front acreage, 15 acres, and within the next 6 months and pay you cash, and then have the option to buy the back 16 acres within 2 years after that. And Brother Roberts agreed to it. Billy Joe said, if we can do this, come up with $3 million for the first 15, $2 million for the back 16, he said, then you'll know it's God, we'll know it's God, and God will know it's God. Because, see, we had a full-fledged kindergarten through 12th grades with teachers that we had to pay. VBI, VWMTC, those are our Bible school and mission school. And we had a full-fledged staff. And so we had to pay salaries to all these people. And it wasn't like we just had $3 million. In fact, we had never seen $3 million. Yeah. We didn't have that much come in a whole year. And so when Billy Joe saw that in his spirit, then he felt in his heart, you're going to give away $700,000 that you've got as a seed because you don't have enough in your hand to pay for it. Now, that doesn't make sense to the natural mind. And when Billy Joe stood up and announced it to our congregation that Sunday, he said, this is what we're going to do. We have 6 months to raise $3 million on top of what we are receiving as our weekly incomes. And he said, and the Lord said to me, we're going to give away what we've got. The seed that we have is $700,000. Well, you could have heard everybody gasp and the air suck out of all the Maybe Center that day when he announced that. Because that made no sense to the natural mind. But see, when you are in a church with vision, and it's very important because I know of a lot of places. I grew up in church. Like I said, my father's a pastor, that didn't have vision. But when you have vision and you hear God and you follow God's leading, God will somehow, some way, make a way if you're willing to do all you can do. So anyway, We cast the vision to our congregation. We emptied our savings, our checking, and we just said, we're going after this. This is the giant, and we're going after. We're going to slay this giant that, the banks kept waiting and thinking we're going to go and borrow. And, we knew God had said we couldn't. And so I'm telling you, people were stretching. Kids were bringing piggy banks, and people were bringing their savings and different things. And yet, you know what? No one ended up being decreased during that time. In fact, as people began to release their faith and sacrifice, it was like miracles started happening financially in people's lives. And so by the end of that 6 months, we'd given away all that $700,000, and that 31st of December, I'll never forget it, at midnight, we finally got all that money in, and we were celebrating being able to write that check. And that was just the beginning, because that was just to get the property, and then we had to build the building.